Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kim from Professional Advantage, and welcome to our Dynamics GP End of Financial Year Process webinar for 2021. Okay, so as I mentioned, my name's Kim Carrup and I'm one of the Inside Account Managers here with PA. So I've been with PA for about 16, 17 years, so a bit of a long-termer. And so I'm going to hopefully step us through what we can. And it's obviously my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, and that is Susan Sue. Now, Susan's been with PA for 12 years, but has over 15 years experience working with GP. So this is a very knowledgeable young lady that we've got taking us through this session today. So I'm going to sit back. I get the nice job of sitting back. Susan gets to do the hard job and talk for the next half hour or so, taking us through the GP year-end process. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Kim, for the nice introduction. For those of you, if I've worked with you in the past, welcome to the GP end of year process webinar, and also welcome to those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to work with you, and hopefully I can be of service to you in the future. We usually, PA, would present this webinar be close to the financial year end time. So we think it's a good timing for us to go over the GP end of year process in preparation for our financial year end process. Just to start with the webinar, and this webinar is going to be covering the following sessions. Yeah, first of all, we're going to talk about the preparation work. So what do we need to do before we starting doing the end of the year process in GP? And also we're going to explain what actually happens as part of the GP year-end process, module by module. And we're going to leave some time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions. As Kim mentioned before, you can type in questions in the question chatting area during the webinar, and we'll go over this at the end of question time. Okay, let's get started with the year-end process. As part of the preparation for your GP year-end, there are things we need to do to go through. Things like we need to make sure we complete the posting procedure for the financial year in all modules. Obviously, all transactions needs to be posted for the closing financial year before we start running the year-end process for the applicable module. And if it's for GL module end of the year process, obviously any final adjustment entries in GL needs to be posted as well. And also, we would also want to print account list to verify the posting type for each account are set up correct. By doing that, we're going to ensure, P&L accounts are indeed set up with the posting type as a P&L, and the same thing goes for balance sheet accounts. They need to be set up for the intended posting type in GP correctly. And we also need to verify settings in the GL setup window. We will need to verify the GL setup window, which there is a account that we need to nominate as a retained earnings account. Now, this is a crucial account that needs to be set up correctly, because this retained earnings account is going to get all the summarized balance from your P&L accounts in GP, bring forward the balance from the closed financial year into the new financial year, which is next year. And any key financial reports as part of the year-end preparation, we need to print them, And obviously, we need to set up the new financial year if it hasn't been set up. So we need to do that before the year-end closing process. And we will need to also close all the financial periods, module by module, yeah, for all series. That's what it means. Although that's optional, we don't, say that that's a must, because, the end of year process still runs without doing this. But it is a good practice to close the physical period in the physical period setup window in GP. And also, we need to make up a full GP database backup. Now, one thing I'd like you will notice throughout this webinar is the word backup. So it's backup before the year-end process and backup in part of the preparation for year-end process. And also we need to do backup right after the year-end process. So you won't be surprised. So when I mention, backup in preparation or, as part of the year-end process later on, module by module. What actually, things that we need to understand as part of the year-end process in GP, there are the right sequence we need to follow when we say year-end close or end of the year process in GP, to get the correct year-end results. So for all the modules in GP, the first module that needs to be closed or run year-end process for is the inventory module. So for those of you that you do use inventory module in GP, so need to remember this module needs to be closed before any other module end of year process to be run. And then after inventory module is the AR and AP module to follow. Then after AP is the fixed asset module to be run. So remember, fixed asset module is recommended to run after AP and the inventory module. Now GL is the last module to run. So just to expand on this point, GL module end of the year, because the way that GP allows us to continue processing future year transaction in GL module without closing the prior financial year. So the timing of the GL module closing would vary from organization to organization, but we wouldn't recommend that you perhaps leave GL module unclosed for too long. The reason for that is simple. Because the nature of the GP end of year process will bring the balance for all of your balance sheet accounts as beginning balance for the next financial year. So without running the end of year process in GL, you'll find that your financial reports or GL inquiry screens will not give you the beginning year balance. Okay, so you might find this challenge when you run your reports. Your balance sheet report doesn't look as nicely without the beginning balance, right? So for that reason, we would recommend you probably wouldn't want to leave GL module end of year process to be run for too long. And in addition to that, there is a good feature in GP that allows us to post transactions back into the last closed financial year. So for any reason that you think you need to adjust something, you can still post a journal back into the last closed financial year, even though the GL end of the year has been run. Okay, so that's another reason perhaps you shouldn't leave the GL end of the year open for too long. Okay, so let's start, going through the module end of year process. As I mentioned before, the first module that we need to do end of the year for in GP is inventory module. Now, if you don't actually use the inventory module, or the inventory module is not even set up in your GP system, you can ignore it. But if you do use inventory module, then you need to start end of the year process from this module. Okay, as part of the end of year preparation, there are a list of things we need to go through and check before you know you're ready for the actual end of year process for inventory module. Things like you need to make sure you post all the transactions for the year you intend to close in the inventory module. And then once that transactions are all posted, make a backup of the company database where the end of year for this module is going to happen. And also you need to run a reconcile and the check links on the inventory module. Now, this is just part of the database maintenance we recommend you do. Usually when you run check links or on a module in GP, if depending on the data integrity, if there are issues in the database, at the end of the check link process, you usually get an error log report. Now, please do review the error log report if you do get one, and make sure the issues or maybe warnings displayed on the report can be resolved, or just make sure it's not going to impact majorly in your database. Now, for interpreting those error messages, probably sometimes, because it probably won't come out as in what we call everyday English. So if you find it challenging to understand, you can get help from our help desk and see what they say, and depending on the error, they might recommend you to do things accordingly. So just make sure you keep that the error log report if there are errors on it. And then you need to complete a physical inventory count and post any adjustments. That's basically the end of year stock take, right? I think that's something we should know that needs to happen before you do the end of year process for inventory module. So stock take end of year and post any adjustments there may be. That's another thing we need to make sure happens. And also print any additional reports that you usually do keep for inventory module. Then again, after all this, it is recommended that you do another backup of the company database. When it comes to the time that you are ready to do the year-end close for inventory module, you will actually close the year using the inventory year-end closing screen. That screen looks like something like this. I'll just quickly bring over a screenshot that I had on my end of year preparation material to show you. Unfortunately, the GP window is not working for us today. So this window looks like this, yeah? So this is the inventory year-end close module. On that screen, just for now, because I'm going to move that away, we have some options for you to tick. Things like discontinued items, they can be removed as part of the year-end process, and sold lot attributes if you do lot tracking in inventory for your items, and sold receipts and cost change history prior to you can nominate a date. Usually this is the end of the financial year that you are trying to close. And you can tick this option here. It'll also update item standard cost if you are using standard costing for your items, right? So this is simple screen. And also, once we've done the end of year process for inventory module, in the financial period setup window in the GP company, it is recommended that you give the inventory module a tick to close the last period in the year that you just run the year-end process for. So here, that's why we put optional, because you can start any process without doing that, but it is highly recommended you do close the period. therefore, no one can post additional transactions into the closed year. And finally, we recommend you to make another backup. Now, bearing in mind, when we do year-end close, as I mentioned before, backup, all the way through, you need to do a lot of backups. For those of you that if you need to rely on your IT to assist you to do backups, so maybe just liaise with IT, be there, so you will need them to do this thing, a few times, maybe even for the year-end close. Otherwise, if you can do it yourself, then that's a bit easier. Now, what actually happens when we do the year-end process in the inventory module, right? Now, the things are happening as part of the year-end process in this module. GP is very busy, even though the year-end close window looks quite simple. Just a few ticks option there for you to tick, and then you can press one button to go kick off the year-end process. But in the back end, the GP is actually doing a lot of data shuffling to get the year-end process correct. So things like transferring or summarize the current year quantity, cost, and sales amount to transaction history for the items for which you've been keeping summarized the sales history. Now, in the item maintenance window, when you set up any inventory items, there are history options for you to tick. Most likely, you would have this, maintain history option ticked. And if you did, when you initially set up the item, this is when the summarized history is going to write to a history table for the item. So this is part of the year-end process work. And also the system will update item beginning quantity to the quantity on hand for each site, at each site. And it will also zero the quantity sold field in item quantity maintenance window for each site, and remove any discontinued item from the records of lot numbered items, if they, you track lot numbers, if they have been completely sold, right? So discontinued and completely sold, and if you track lot number, those records can be removed. And it can also remove purchase receipts for items that have been completely sold. Again, that's optional. So remember that screen I showed you before? Those tick boxes are option that you can tick or choose not to. So this is what's happening as part of the inventory year-end process. And there are a few more things happening too. So it'll also remove, depending on the option you choose, it'll also remove discontinued item from the records that have been completely sold, and removes any lot attributes from the record of lot numbered items if, again, they're completely sold off from the system. It also updates the standard cost of each item to the current cost if you are using either FIFO or LOFO, first in, first out, or last in, first out, if you use this inventory valuation method. So very busy, when we click a button, say, kick off the year-end process. So this is what's happening in the inventory module. Now let's move to the AR module. So to get us ready to start in end-of-year process for AR, here are a list of things that we recommend you to go through as a checking list. Firstly, again, we need to make sure any transactions for the year we intend to close have been posted, and we also done our usual month-end process for the AR module, right? Following that, we straight away recommend you to do a backup of the company database, and then you do a reconcile and the check links routine on sales module. this is, again, as part of the database maintenance process. I don't know whether you usually do it on a regular basis. If you do, you would be very familiar with this checklink process. Now, the reason we recommend you do a backup before checklinks is similar with what I just mentioned before. The checklink report might flash out some errors, and depending on what the nature of the error displayed, we might recommend you to go back to the the backup that you did prior to the checklinks. So if you are unsure about any of these errors, again, you can contact the PA help desk, and they might be able to give you some advice if it's straightforward. If they deem that needs to require a consultant to assist, then they can arrange it for you. And also, we need to close the year using receivable year-end closing window. Now, what this window look like? It looks like this. Let me just quickly show you this window. This is the receivable year-end closing window. Again, simple looking screen, yeah, not as busy as some of the transaction entry windows, right? So you have options here. You close financial year or calendar year. Usually we recommend just close all, and also make sure if you wanna keep any reporting, tick that box. Once we set up tick the right options in the A of the financial year we just closed. And also you can optionally do this by going to the period setup window, also close the last financial period for tax reasons. Now, bearing in mind, if you still have AP you need to process, perhaps it's a good idea to leave the tax period open though, because AR might not be the last module that you need to close financial periods for. So, okay, you need to do this accordingly, yeah? Close the tax period. And again, after all of these, we recommend you to do another company database backup. Okay, so these are the things that we need to do for AR end of year process. Now, what's actually happened? What is happening as part of the year-end process in the AR module? Again, the system is very busy. It does a lot of things, right? Some of these are AR end of the year will affect the year-to-date field in the amount since last closed view within the data summary window. Now, unfortunately, as I can't show you the GP windows, this is a window for information earning. Okay, so in the window, we have a summarized fields for the amounts that listed under the year-to-date column, and there will be data listed under the life-to-date column as well. So before we run the end of the year, throughout the whole financial year, the transactions happened for a debtor or customer it's summarized up in the year-to-date column, year-to-date field. And once we finished the year-end process, that amount listed under the heading says year-to-date field will be added onto what was displayed under the life-to-date column, make it part of the history. And then the year-to-date column will become 0, for us to adding on the new financial year transaction. Now, for that reason, because this window is an information earning window, and if you find a challenge to close the AR module right on the dot at the last process of the closing financial year, it probably won't matter too much. It's just that, this is not the earning window that we can or we should rely on to get that type of information. But if you can, always do that before you process the next financial year AR transaction, go and close the AR module, do the year-end process, that's what I mean. And depending on the options that you choose to close the calendar year and the financial year, the year-end process will do that accordingly for you. As I said before, it is advisable that AR end-of-year process being run before you beginning posting transactions for a new financial year. The reason being, if you post the transaction for the new financial year before you close the AR module, those records will be added onto the year-to-date figure, which will be mixed up with the prior financial year data, right? So, but if you can't ensure to close the financial year before you need to posting transactions for the next financial year, it won't matter. Still doesn't matter. It's just that, viewing that screen view wouldn't reflect correctly for the information, but it's not end of the world. So that's AR module. When it comes to AP, we still have a list of things that we recommend you to go through as a checking process, right? Saying things like, you need to make sure all transactions for the closing financial year are all posted. And then you need to make a backup of the company database. And also, again, run the reconcile and check links on AP module. Now, always do review the error log report if there is one after the checklink module. And, if there are errors, we perhaps need to do something accordingly based on what the error may be reflected on there. And there may not be any errors, then, that means your AP module data integrity is pretty good. Always, we recommend you to print an AP historical aged trial balance as part of the checking or preparation process for your AP end of the year. And after all of these, we recommend you to do another backup of the company database. Once you've done that, you're basically ready to actually do the year-end process itself. I have an AP window for what's actually happened for, if you do a year-end process, this creditor yearly summary inquiry window, how that works. For debtors in the AR module, we have a similar looking window, right? But I haven't got the AR window to show you before. While we're talking about AP, I get to show you this window. Now, before you actually click on the process button on the AP end of year process, you'll see in this window, anything processed prior to the year end for AP is rolling for a creditor. The transactions are summarized in this screen under the year-to-date column. Right, the moment we hit the process button on the AP end-of-year process window, these amounts will be moved and adding on to if there are any existing, life-to-date figures showing here. So in this particular example, looks like this is a new creditor just added for that particular year we're trying to close, right? So the year-to-date figure will at the same time displayed in here as last year figure. And the amounts will be adding on to the life-to-date figure, and the year-to-date transaction after the AP year-end rollover will be zeroed out, will be as zero. So basically ready for you to start posting new financial year transactions. And then all of those transactions will be adding up and displaying in this column. Okay, so AR for debtors, we have similar kind of a window here. Again, this window is purely for information earning. If you a day later do the year end, apart from any transaction you posted, regardless which month, will be adding on to the year-to-date column until you do the year-end process. So that's the inaccuracy for information displayed on this window. But as I said before, a lot of our organizations or clients not purely relying on this window to for information, right? With AP module, AP is a typical module that, we quite often receive later arrival invoices. What do we do with later arrival invoices? Because it is common in AP module. Now, depending on your organization's internal process rules, you either wait for the later arrival invoices, if possible, to enter it into the last period of the closing financial year, or you might choose to do it differently. You might choose to post them as in the new financial year, because you can't afford to wait. So whichever way that you as an organization has a process rule for, just follow that. It won't matter, how accurately information displayed here is going to be, right? So the year-end close window, it's a quite simple window in there. It's basically, some options you click and then you can start the year-end process. So after you, finished the AP year-end process, we again recommend you to close the financial period for the AP module in the financial period setup window. And if possible, if AP is the last module that you need to close, and you can, in turn to close the tax period for the last financial period in the last closed financial year, and then again make another backup. So let's have a look what actually happens as part of the AP year-end process. The AP year-end process is only going to affect the amounts since last closed view within the creditor yearly summary window, which is the window I showed you before. So that's what it does, yeah, shuffles data busy in the back end, but from the front end, what we can see is that process I just described, shuffling data from one column to another. So you get to see, what's last year transaction record, and what are the year-to-date figures, because those things are going to be changed accordingly. It is advisable that your AP end of year should be performed before you begin posting transactions for the new financial year. Now, if you can do that, meaning, closed AP module before you start processing next financial year's AP transaction, do that. But if you find that this is probably very challenging or even not possible, then it doesn't matter if you leave it a bit too long. The only thing that's going to impact is that display on that creditor financial summary window that I showed you before. It's not the end of the year. Your AP historical aged trial balance is going to correctly reflect exactly what the end of the year position is for each of your creditor. Right? That's a report. It's not going to be impacted by the end of year process. Okay, now let's have a look the year-end process for our fixed asset module. For those of you who do use GP fixed asset module, it is a really good module to have, and its end of year process, it's also straightforward. But please remember, before we do our fixed asset year-end process, just to make sure we go through this checklist, there are things we need to do before we can do the year-end process. Now, we need to make sure AP module year-end's been run. Basically, this is to ensure that if we've set up our AP module to integrate with our fixed asset module, usually this is a setting that we always recommend you to have, then it is crucial that we need to make sure our AP module end of year is run before we do the fixed asset module year-end process. And we're going to need to make sure the fixed asset calendar is built correctly. Now, with fixed asset calendar building, usually we would build the fixed asset calendar at the very beginning when we start using or implementing fixed asset module for you. But it is recommendable for as part of the year-end process, we check the calendar is still correct. And if it needs to be rebuilt, we can rebuild it. We just need to rebuild it, yeah? And especially if we've changed, some financial period set up in GL, then, your fixed asset module needs to be correctly reflected that calendar as well. But that, it's not something happen commonly. Okay, the next thing we need to check is we need to enter in all activity for the current financial year for the book that is intended to be closed. So the activity, fixed asset routine activities, including your additions and retirements, if any, and changes or transfers, right, between, one class to another, or maybe one physical location to another, whatever changes that needs to happen for that financial year. All of these has happened before we do the fixed asset year. And also we need to make sure, now this is important, to run depreciation for all of your assets on your asset register for that closing financial year, right through to the last day of the financial year you intend to close for that particular fixed asset book. If this is not done, there are consequences. Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail in that. You just need to make sure the depreciation for all of your assets for a particular book that you intend to run end of year process has been done to the very last day of the financial year. And also we need to make sure anything that we need to interface to the GL module from fixed assets, that's also been done as well. So for those of you are familiar with fixed asset process, like interface into GL, you don't know this GL posting screen in fixed assets, right? We just need to make sure nothing has left unposted from fixed asset to GL before we do the year-end process, which I think that's a logical thing to do. And we need to run key fixed asset reports. So depending on what reports you deem as a key, make sure you run that. Usually you probably run those reports as a normal month-end fixed asset module month-end process anyway. So that, again, needs to be done before you do the year-end process. And lastly, make a backup of the company database before you kick off the fixed asset module year-end process. Now, what's actually happening in the background for the fixed asset year-end process? Those are the listed here. Basically displays or shows us what's actually happening behind the scenes. The year-to-date maintenance account is removed and the quantity is copied to the beginning quantity field. Now, again, that's similar with the AIAP module. When we do the year-end process, there are data shuffling happening behind the scenes, so we can align data according to our calendar. And the year-to-date depreciation amount is removed, so that gets zeroed out, ready for the next financial year data. And the cost basis is copied to the beginning year cost field, and the life-to-date depreciation amount is also copied to the beginning reserve field. So all of those things are happening without even the front user notice anything. That's part of the year-end process. And the salvage value, if that's applicable to your fixed asset setup, it's also copied to the beginning salvage field. The financial year that are linked or assigned to the fixed asset module will be incremented or moved to the new financial year. So this is all of this are what's happening behind the scenes for the fixed asset module as part of the year-end process. The GL is the last module we need to do year-end process for, right? GL needs to be the last module again, printing as part of the preparation, printing key financial reports is something we need to do. Just make sure, we have the correct financial position or reports that in hand before we close the year. And obviously, we need to set up new financial year. If you haven't done so by now, that needs to be set up through the financial period setup window. And then it's just basically run the year-end process. If it's applicable, we just need to adjust the budget figures for the new year and print financial statements. So for those of you that use GP budgets, you need to do this. The last thing we need to do is, get ready for the year-end process by making a company database backup. In GL module, right, what's actually happening when the year-end, it actually, behind the scenes, it does a lot of stuff. It reconciles and summarizes the GL balance that accumulated throughout the year and moving all the P&L account balances to the retained earnings account. Now, this account, if I show you this GL setup window, is the account we nominated in our general ledger setup window, and it also displays in the end of the year closing window here. So double check that account whether it's still correct. There are other options that we can tick if it's applicable. We can remove unused segment numbers. So for those of you, you might have some segments that's set up that's never been used in the chart of account structure. Then those unused segments can be removed if you choose to do so. And you can also choose to maintain inactive accounts. So those are the options that you can choose. Since GP version 2013, the reverse history year option available as on the year-end close window. What this does is, if we've done an end of the year process and we don't think that's the correct answer, we can reverse the year-end process. Now, prior to GP 2013, to be able to reverse a GL year-end process, it's a huge job. And we, as your GP support partner, we can't even do that. We have to engage Microsoft to use a special tool to do that. But since that version, this reverse history year button is available. So this is what we can use to reverse a unsuccessful, if you like, year-end process for the GL module. Or the sub-modules don't have this reverse button there. Just keep in mind. If we need to redo it, we just need to restore backup. Okay, so this is what's happening. And at the end of the year-end process for GL, the system will print a end-of-year closing report. This report will list all accounts that are closed and the transactions that's created to close those accounts. Basically, what that is for all the P&L accounts, because the GL year-end process will zero out all the P&L account balances and summarize up their balance into the retained earning account that we nominated in the GL module setup window. And then at the same time, move forward balances for all of your balance sheet reports as a beginning balance for the new financial year. Right, so this is another reason why it's critical that we need to make sure any new accounts set up for the closing financial year, or for that matter, any accounts that has been posted to in the closing financial year, the posting account is set up correctly, because, with what's happening as part of the year-end process, it matters. So this is the GL year-end process, what's happening behind the scenes. Now it leads us to the question time.
Thanks, Susan. So one that we've got here is, if we have set up period 13 for finance book, do I need to set up period 13 for fixed assets as well?
Okay, That's a good question. You don't need to set up period 13 for fixed asset module. But as part of the building your calendar, the fixed asset module will mimic your GL period setup. So what you need to ensure, because quite often we just take it for granted, yeah? If we've done period 12 depreciation for all of my assets, we think we've done it for the year. Now, since you have period 13 set up in GL, when you build your fixed asset calendar, period 13 will be there. So you need to make sure if your period 13 is the last day of the closing financial year, then this 1 day depreciation you still need to run for all of your assets, right? So just recap, you don't need to specially build that calendar for period 13, but your fixed asset calendar should, if you build it correctly, should reflect the GL period setup. And therefore, you naturally have the period 13 there. You don't need to manually go and create them. And all the processes we advise you do before the year end, you need to make sure it's done for that period 13, especially depreciation.
Great, thank you, Susan. Look, I'll do one quick more. Just one of the questions here is, we've introduced analytical accounting during the year for our accounting. Will this impact on the GL close process?
Okay, again, that's a really good question. If you recently introduced AA, analytical accounting, to your system, there are things that we need to be aware, but for the analytical accounting module itself, there isn't a hard, fasten year-end close process we need to do, because how the analytical accounting module works, it almost like it sits onto all the GL modules, yeah? So if you post an invoice in AP, and if the expense account needs to be somehow coded against AA codes, then that AA module sits on top of the normal AP process or posting process. We'll get the AA information updated. So the AA module, we call it module, but it doesn't function independently by itself, if you know what I mean, yeah? It sits on top of either AR, AP, or GL, or even fixed asset modules, depending on what you want your AA codes to, how you want it to work. So we just need to make sure if there are problems as part of the year-end process and AA, it doesn't function as normal, there are things that we can go through to resolve these issues. But usually, especially in the later version, you just mentioned that you recently implemented the AA. I just assumed that you're sitting on a later version of GP rather than anything prior to GP 2013. AA module, it actually functions pretty smoothly as part of the year. So there isn't anything that we need to specifically do or checking for AA module, and that's why you don't even see as part of my presentation, there isn't anything specifically targeted for the AA module.
Fantastic. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate that. If you would like any assistance with your year-end close, you can speak with your inside account manager. If for some reason you're not sure who that is, you can send an email just to inquiries@pa.com.au, and they will ensure that it gets to your inside account manager. So again, thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate you running through the year-end processes with us today. Thank you everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks everyone.